Chapter 6. The Festivities. This is one of those chapters again where Professor Bongiorno of Columbia, the Florinese guru, claims that Morgenstern's satiric genius is at its fullest flower. That's the way this guy talks. Fullest flower, delicious drolleries, on and on. The Festivities chapter is mostly detailed descriptions of, guess what? Bingo, the festivities. It's like 89 days to the nuptials, and every high muckamuck and Florin has to give a due for the couple, and what Morgenstern fills his pages with is how the various riches of the time entertain. What kind of parties, what kind of food, who did the decorations, how did the seating arrangements get seated, all that kind of thing. The only interesting part, but it's not worth going through 44 pages for, is that Prince Humperdinck gets more and more interested and mannerly toward Buttercup, cutting down even a little on his hunting activities. And, more important, because of the foiling of the kidnapping attempt, three things happen. One, everyone is pretty well convinced that the plot was engineered by Guilder, so relations between the countries are more than a little strained. Two, Buttercup is just adored by everybody because the rumors are all over that she acted very brave and even came through the fire swamp alive. And three, Prince Humperdinck is, at last, in his own land, a hero. He was never popular, what with his hunting fetish and leaving the country to kind of rot once his old man got senile, but the way he foiled the kidnapping made everybody realize that this was some brave fella, and they were lucky to have him next in line to lead them. Anyhow, these 44 pages cover just about the first month of party giving, and it's not to the end of that for my money, things get going again. Buttercup is in bed, pooped, it's late, the end of another long party, and as she waits for sleep, she wonders what sea Westley is riding on, and the giant and the Spaniard, whatever happened to them. So eventually, in 3 quick flashbacks, Morgenstern returns to what I think is the story. When Inigo regained consciousness, it was still night on the cliffs of insanity. Far below, the waters of Florin Channel pounded. Inigo stirred, blinked, tried to rub his eyes, couldn't. His arms were tied together around a tree. Inigo blinked again, banishing cobwebs. He had gone on his knees to the man in black, ready for death. Clearly, the victor had other notions. Inigo looked around as best he could, and there it was, the 6-fingered sword, glittering in the moonlight like lost magic. Inigo stretched his right leg as far as it would go and managed to touch the handle. Then it was simply a matter of inching the weapon close enough to be graspable by one hand, and then it was an even simpler task to slash his bindings. He was dizzy when he stood, and he rubbed his head behind his ear where the man in black had struck him. A lump, sizable, to be sure, but not a major problem. The major problem was what to do now. Vizzini has strict instructions for occasions such as this when a plan went wrong. Go back to the beginning. Back to the beginning and wait for Vizzini, then regroup, replan, start again. Inigo had even made a little rhyme out of it for Fezzik so the giant would not have problems remembering what to do in time of trouble. Fool, back to the beginning is the rule. Inigo knew precisely where the beginning was. They had gotten the job in Florin City itself, the thieves' quarter. Vizzini had made the arrangements alone as he always did. He had met with their employer, had accepted the job, had planned it, all in the thieves' quarter. So the thieves' quarter was clearly the place to go. Only, Inigo hated it there. Everybody was so dangerous, big, mean, and muscular, and so what if he was the greatest fencer in the world who know what to look at him? He looked like a skinny Spanish guy it might be fun to rob. You couldn't walk around with a sign saying, "Be careful, this is the greatest fencer since the death of the Wizard of Corsica. Do not burgle." Besides, and here Inigo felt deep pain, he wasn't that great a fencer, not anymore. He couldn't be. Hadn't he just been beaten? Once, true, he had been a Titan, but now... What happens here that you aren't going to read is a 6-page soliloquy from Inigo, in which Morgenstern, through Inigo, reflects on the anguish of fleeting glory. The reason for the soliloquy here is that Morgenstern's previous book had gotten bombed by the critics and also hadn't sold beans. Aside, did you know that Robert Browning's first book of poems didn't sell one copy? True, even his mother didn't buy it at her local bookstore. Have you ever heard anything more humiliating? How would you like to have been Browning and it's your first book and you have the secret hopes that now you'll be somebody. Established, important. And you give it a week before you ask the publisher how things are going because you don't want to seem pushy or anything. And then maybe you drop by and it was probably all very English and understated in those days. And you're Browning and you chit-chat around a bit before you drop the biggie. Oh, by the way, any notions yet on how many poems might be doing? And then his editor, who had been dreading this moment, probably says, well, you know how it is with poetry these days. Nothing's taking off like it used to. Requires a bit of time for the word to get around. And then finally, somebody had to say it. None, Bob. Sorry, Bob. No. We haven't yet had one authenticated sale. We thought for a bit that Hatcher's had a potential buyer down by Piccadilly, but it didn't quite work out. Sorry, Bob. Of course we'll keep you posted in the event of a breakthrough. End of aside. Anyway, Inigo finishes his speech to the cliffs and spends the next few hours fighting a fisherman who sails him back to Florin City. The thieves' quarter was worse than he remembered. Always before, Fezzik had been with him, and they made rhymes, and Fezzik was enough to keep any thief away. Inigo moved panicked up the dark streets, desperately afraid. Why this giant fear? What was he afraid of? He sat on a filthy stoop and pondered. Around him there were cries in the night and, from the alehouses, vulgar laughter. He was afraid, he realized then, because as he sat there, gripping the 6-fingered sword for confidence, he was suddenly back to what he had been before Vizzini had found him. A failure. A man without point, with no attachment to tomorrow. Inigo had not touched brandy in years. Now he felt his fingers fumbling for money. Now he heard his footsteps running toward the nearest alehouse. Now he saw his money on the counter. Now he felt the brandy bottle in his hands. Back to the stoop he ran. He opened the bottle. He smelled the rough brandy. He took a sip. He coughed. He took a swallow. He coughed again. He gulped it down and coughed and gulped some more and half began to smile. His fears were starting to leave him. After all, why should he have even been afraid? He was Inigo Montoya. The bottle was half gone now, son of the great Domingo Montoya. So what was there in the world worth fearing? Now all the brandy was gone. How dare fear approach a wizard such as Inigo Montoya? Well, never again. Into the second bottle. Never, 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 never again. He sat alone and confident and strong. His life was straight and fine. He had money enough for brandy, and if you had that, you had the world. The stoop was wretched and bleak. Inigo slumped there, quite contented, clutching the bottle in his once trembling hands. Existence was really very simple when you did what you were told, and nothing could be simpler or better than what he had in store. All he had to do was wait and drink until Vizzini came. Fezzik had no idea how long he was unconscious. He only knew, as he staggered to his feet on the mountain path, that his throat was very sore when the man in black had strangled him. What to do? The plans had all gone wrong. Fezzik closed his eyes, trying to think. There was a proper place to go where plans went wrong, but he couldn't quite remember it. Inigo had even made a rhyme up for him so he wouldn't forget, and now, even with that, he was so stupid he had forgotten. Was that it? Was it stupid, go and wait for Vizzini with Cupid? That rhymed, but where was the Cupid? Dummy, go out now and fill your tummy? That rhymed too, but what kind of instructions were those? What to do? Dunce, use your brains to do it right for once? No help. Nothing was any help. He never had done anything right, not in his whole life, until Vizzini came, and without another thought, Fezzik ran off into the night after the Sicilian. Vizzini was napping when he got there. He had been drinking wine and dozed off. Fezzik dropped to his knees and put his hands in prayer position. Vizzini, I'm sorry, he began. Vizzini napped on. Fezzik shook him gently. Vizzini did not wake. Not so gently this time. Nothing. Oh, I see you're dead, Fezzik said. He stood up. He's dead, Vizzini is, he said softly, and then, with not a bit of help from his brain, a great scream of panic burst from his throat into the night. Inigo! And he whirled back down the mountain path, because if Inigo was alive, it would be all right. It wouldn't be the same. No, it could never be that without Vizzini to order them and insult them as only he could, but at least there would be time for poetry, and when Fezzik reached the cliffs of insanity, he said, Inigo, Inigo, here I am. To the rocks and, I'm here, Inigo. It's your Fezzik. To the trees and, Inigo, Inigo, answer me, please. All over until there was no other conclusion to draw, but that just as there was now no Vizzini, so there was also no Inigo, and that was hard. It was, in point of fact, too hard for Fezzik, so he began a run, crying out, Be with you in a minute, Inigo, and right behind you, Inigo, and hey, Inigo, wait up. Wait up, straight up, which was the way he ran. And wouldn't there be fun with rhymes once he and Inigo were together again? But after an hour or so of shouting, his throat gave out because he had, after all, been strangled almost to death in the very recent past. On he ran, on and on and on, until finally he reached a tiny village and found, just outside town, some nice rocks that formed kind of a cave, almost big enough for him to stretch out in. He sat with his back against a rock and his hands around his knees and his throat hurting until the village boys found him. They held their breath and crept as close as they dared. Fezzik hoped they would go away, so he froze, pretending to be off with Inigo, and Inigo would say barrel, and Fezzik right quick would come back carol, and maybe they would sing a little something until Inigo said serenade, and you couldn't stump Fezzik with one that easy because of centigrade, and then Inigo would make a word about the weather, and Fezzik would rhyme it, and that was how it went until the village boys stopped being afraid of him. Fezzik could tell that because they were creeping very close to him now and all of a sudden yelling their lungs out and making crazy faces. He didn't really blame them. He looked like the kind of person you did that to, mocked. His clothes were torn and his throat was gone and his eyes were wild and he probably would have yelled too if he'd been their age. It was only when they found him funny that he found it, though he did not know the word degrading. No more yelling. Just laughter now. Laughter, Fezzik thought, and then he thought giraffer, because that's all he was to them, some huge funny thing that couldn't make much noise. Laughter, giraffer, from now to hereafter. Fezzik curled up in his cave and tried looking on the bright side. At least they weren't throwing things at him. Not yet, anyway. Westley awoke chained in a giant cage. His shoulder was beginning to fester from the gnawing and digging that the ROUS had done into his flesh. He ignored his discomfort momentarily to try and adjust to his surroundings. He was certainly underground. It was not the lack of windows that made that sure, more the darkness. From somewhere above him now, he could hear animal sounds, an occasional lion roar, the yelp of the cheetah. Shortly after his return to consciousness, the albino appeared, bloodless, with skin as pale as dying birch. The candlelight that starts to illuminate the cage made the albino seem totally like a creature who had never seen the sun. The albino held a tray which carried many things, bandages and food, healing powders and brandy. Where are we? From Westley. A shrug from the albino. Who are you? Shrug. That was almost the entire extent of the fellow's conversation. Westley asked question after question while the albino tended and redressed his wound, then fed him food that was warm and surprisingly good and plentiful. Shrug. Shrug. Who knows I'm here? Shrug. Lie, but tell me something. Give an answer. Who knows I'm here? Whispered. I know. They know. They? Shrug. The prince and the count, you mean? Nod. And that is all? Nod. When I was brought in, I was half conscious. The count was giving the orders, but 3 soldiers were carrying me. They know too. Shake whispered, "No. They're dead, that's what you're saying?" Shrug. Am I to die then? Shrug. Westley lay back on the floor of the giant underground cage, watching as the albino silently reloaded the tray, glided from sight. If the soldiers were dead, surely it was not unreasonable to assume that he would eventually follow. But if they wanted his erasure, surely it was also not unreasonable to assume that they had not the least intention of doing it immediately. Else why tend his wounds? Why return his strength with good warm food? No, his death would be a while yet. But in the meantime, considering the personalities of his captors, it was finally not unreasonable to assume that they would do their best to make him suffer greatly. Wesley closed his eyes. There was pain coming, and he had to be ready for it. He had to prepare his brain, he had to get his mind controlled and safe from their efforts so that they could not break him. He would not let them break him. He would hold together against anything and all. If only they gave him sufficient time to make ready, he knew he could defeat pain. It turned out they gave him sufficient time. It was months before the machine was ready, but they broke him anyway. At the end of the 30th day of festivities, with 60 days more of parting to enjoy, Buttercup was genuinely concerned that she might lack the strength to endure. Smile, smiled, hold hands, bow and thank over and over. She was simply exhausted for 1 month. How was she to survive twice that? It turned out, because of the king's health, to be both easy and sad. For with 55 days to go, Lutheran began to weaken terribly. Prince Humperdinck ordered new doctors brought in. There was still the last miracle man alive, Max, but since they had fired him long before, bringing him back in the case now was simply not deemed wise. If he was incompetent then, when Lutheran was only desperately ill, how could he suddenly be a cure-all now, with Lutheran dying? The new doctors all agreed on various tried-and-true medications, and within 48 hours of their coming on the case, the king was dead. The wedding date, of course, was unchanged. It was an everyday a country had a 500th anniversary, but all the festivities were either curtailed entirely or vastly cut down, and Prince Humperdinck became 45 days before the wedding, king of Florin, and that changed everything because before he had taken nothing but his hunting seriously, and now he had to learn everything, learn to run a country, and he buried himself in books and wise men and how did you tax this, and when should you tax that, and foreign entanglements, and who could be trusted, and how far, and with what. And before her lovely eyes, Humperdinck changed from a man of fear and action to one of frenzied wisdom, because he had to get it all straight now before any other country dared interfere with the future of Florin. So the wedding, when it actually took place, was a tiny thing in brief, sandwiched in between a minister's meeting and a treasury crisis, and Buttercup spent her first afternoon as queen wandering around the castle, not knowing what in the world to do with herself. It wasn't until King Humperdinck walked out on the balcony with her to greet the gigantic throng that had spent the day in patient waiting that she realized it had happened. She was the queen. Her life, for whatever it was worth, belonged now to the people. They stood together on the castle balcony, accepting the cheers, the cries, the endless thunder of hip-hips, until Buttercup said, "Please, may I walk once more among them?" And the king said with a nod that she might, and down she went again, as on the day of the wedding announcement, radiant and alone. And again the people swept apart to let her pass, weeping and cheering and bowing in, and then one person booed. On the balcony watching it all, Humperdinck reacted instantly, gesturing soldiers into the area where the sound had come from, dispatching more troops quickly down to surround the queen, and like clockwork Buttercup was safe, the booer apprehended and led away. "Hold a moment," Buttercup said, still shaken by the unexpectedness of what had happened. The soldier who held the booer stopped. "Bring her to me," Buttercup said, and in a moment the booer was right there eye to eye. It was an ancient woman, withered and bent, and Buttercup thought of all the faces that had gone by in her lifetime, but this one she could not remember. "Have we met?" the queen asked. The old one shook her head. "Then why? Why on this day? Why do you insult the queen?" Because you are not worthy of cheers, the old woman said, and suddenly she was yelling, You had love in your hands and you gave it up for gold. She turned to the crowd. It is true what I tell you. There was love alongside her in the fire swamp, and she dropped it from her fingers like garbage, and that is what she is, the queen of garbage. I had given my word to the prince, Buttercup began, but the old woman would not be quieted. Ask her how she got through the fire swamp. Ask her if she did it alone. She threw love away to be the queen of grime, the queen of muck. I am old and life means nothing to me, so I am the only person in all this crowd to dare to tell truth. And truth says, bow to the queen of feculence if you want to, but not I. Cheer the queen of slime and ordure if you want to, but not I. Rave over the beauty of the queen of cesspools, but not I. Not I. She was advancing on Buttercup now. Take her away, Buttercup ordered. But the soldiers could not stop her, and the old woman kept coming on, her voice getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and Buttercup woke up screaming. She was in her bed, alone, safe. The wedding was still 60 days away, but her nightmares had begun. The next night she dreamed of giving birth to their first child and... Interruption, and hey, how about giving old Morgenstern credit for a major league fake out there? I mean, didn't you think for a while at least that they really were married? I did. It's one of my biggest memories of my father reading. I had pneumonia, remember, but I was a little better now and madly caught up in the book. And one thing you know when you're 10 is that no matter what, there's going to be a happy ending. They can sweat all they want to scare you, the authors. But back of it, you know, you just have no doubt that in the long run, justice is going to win out. And Westley and Buttercup, well, they had their troubles, sure, but they were going to get married and lived happily ever after. I would have bet the family fortune if I found a sucker big enough to take me on. Well, when my father got through that sentence, where the wedding was sandwiched between the ministers' meeting and the treasury whatever, I said, You read that wrong. My father's this little bald barber, remember that too? And kind of illiterate. Well, you just don't challenge a guy who has trouble reading and says he's read something incorrectly, because that's really threatening. I'm doing the reading, he said. I know that, but you got it wrong. She didn't marry that rotten Humperdinck. She marries Westley. It says right here, my father began, a little huffy, and he starts going over it again. You must have skipped a page then. Something. Get it right, huh? By now, he was more than a tiny bit upset. I skipped something. I read the words. The words are there. I read them. Good night. And off he went. Hey, please no, I called after him, but he's stubborn, and next thing, my mother wasn't saying, Your father says his throat is too sore. I told him not to read so much. And she tucked and fluffed me, and no matter how I battled, it was over. No more story till the next day. I spent that whole night thinking Buttercup married Humperdinck. It just rocked me. How can I explain it? But the world didn't work that way. Good got attracted to good, evil you flushed down the John, and that was that. But their marriage, I couldn't make it jibe. God, did I work at it. First, I thought that probably Buttercup had this fantastic effect on Humperdinck and turned him into a kind of Westley, or maybe Westley and Humperdinck turned out to be long-lost brothers, and Humperdinck was so happy to get his brother back, he said, Look, Westley, I didn't realize who you were when I married her, so what I'll do is I'll divorce her and you marry her, and that way we'll all be happy. To this day, I don't think I was ever more creative. But it didn't take. Something was wrong and I couldn't lose it. Suddenly, there was this discontent gnawing away until it had a place big enough to settle in, and then it curled up and stayed there, and it's still inside me lurking as I write this now. The next night, when my father went back to reading, and the marriage turned out to have been Buttercup's dream, I screamed, I knew it. All along I knew it, and my father said, So you're happy now, it's all right now, we can please continue? And I said, Go, and he did. but I wasn't happy. Oh, my ears were happy, I guess. My story sense was happy, my heart too, but in my, I suppose, you have to call it soul, there was that damn discontent shaking its dark head. All this was never explained to me till I was in my teens, and there was this great woman who lived in my hometown, Edith Nasser, dead now, and she wrote terrific books about how we screw up our children. Brothers and Sisters was one of her books, The Eldest Child was another. Published by Harper. Edith didn't need the plug, seeing, like I said, as she's no longer with us. But if there are any amongst you who are worried that maybe you're not being perfect parents, pick up one of Edith's books while there's still time. I knew her because her kid Ed got his haircuts from my pop, and she was this writer, and by my teens I knew, secretly, that was the life for me too, except I couldn't tell anybody. It was too embarrassing. Barber's sons, if they hustled, maybe got to be IBM salesmen, but writers? No way. Don't ask me how, but eventually Edith discovered my ambition, and from then on, sometimes we would talk. And I remember once we were having iced tea on the nicer porch and talking, and just outside the porch was their badminton court, and I was watching some kids play badminton, and Ed had just shellacked me, and as I left the court for the porch, he said, "Don't worry, it'll work out. You'll get me next time." And I nodded, and then Ed said, "And if you don't, you'll beat me at something else." I went to the porch and sipped iced tea, and Edith was reading this book, and she didn't put it down when she said, "That's not necessarily true, you know." I said, "How do you mean?" And that's when she put her book down and looked at me and said it. "Life isn't fair, Bill. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be." Would you believe that for me, right, Ben? It was like one of those comic books where the light bulb goes on over Mandrake the magician's head. "It isn't," I said, so loud I really startled her. "You're right, it's not fair. I was so happy. If I'd known how to dance, I'd have started dancing. Isn't that great? Isn't it just terrific?" I think along about here, Edith must have thought I was well on my way toward being bonkers. But it meant so much to me to have it said, and out and free and flying, that with the discontent I endured the night my father stopped reading, I realized right then that with the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. And that's what I think this book's about. All those Columbia experts can spiel all they want about the delicious satire. They're crazy. This book says life isn't fair, and I'm telling you, one and all, you better believe it. I got a fat, spoiled son. He's not going to now miss Rheingold, and he's always going to be fat. Even if he gets skinny, he'll still be fat, and he'll still be spoiled, and life will never be enough to make him happy. And that's my fault, maybe. Make it all my fault if you want. The point is, we're not created equal. For the rich-faced sing, life isn't fair. I got a cold wife. She's brilliant. She's stimulating. She's terrific. There's no love. That's okay too. Just so long as we don't keep expecting everything to somehow even out for us before we die. Look, grown-ups, skip this paragraph. I'm not about to tell you this book has a tragic ending. I already said in the very first line how it was my favorite in all the world. But there's a lot of bad stuff coming up. Torture you've already been prepared for, but there's worse. There's death coming up, and you better understand this. Some of the wrong people die. Be ready for it. This isn't Curious George or the potty. Nobody warned me, and it was my own fault. You'll see what I mean in a little. And that was my mistake, so I'm not letting it happen to you. The wrong people die, some of them, and the reason is this. Life is not fair. Forget all the garbage your parents put out. Remember Morgenstern. You'll be a lot happier. Okay, enough. Back to the next. Nightmare time.